I'm Becky Dawson, National Wellbeing Lead. Thank you to those of you that have been to other of our TeachMeets. It's fantastic to have you here. Just keep an eye out. We run these regularly, at least once a month. We'll have a TeachMeet on different topics around wellbeing. So I've got one on stress awareness next week that's focused on staff. We're doing something for preparing for Mental Health Awareness Week as well, and a whole school approach to mental health and supporting LGBTQIA+ students in schools. So just keep an eye out for those topics coming up. And on your screen, you'll see that we are now running youth mental health first aid at Twinkl. So if you would like to join the course run by me, then please do scan that QR code and find out more. That's enough from me. I'm going to hand you over to the brilliant Gemma from Cog-Spark, who's going to take you through the next 45 minutes. Thank you so much.
Oh, lovely, Becky, and a warm welcome to everybody this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me for this webinar on managing anxiety in the secondary classroom. Just a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll get started with the session. So my name's Gemma. I co-founded Cog-Spark with my colleague and friend Jessica Parker after we were working together on a number of projects. My background initially was working in the field of mental health as a mental health nurse and clinical manager in the NHS before moving into education. I think it was about 13 years ago. So we do a range of work offering training and consultancy in education, children's services and workplaces as well. So if you do want to take a look at our website, please make sure that you do. And as I say, delighted that you can join me today. As we're going through the webinar today, there will be a couple of points where I just allow you to stop and pause and reflect and digest and maybe kind of think about, you know, your own kind of roles, experience, and kind of almost trying to kind of think about or applying the experiences that you have within your school setting. And I think we probably all join today, don't we, with a recognition of the prevalence of anxiety in secondary school settings. We also see it, you know, in primary settings as well. We are going to be looking at anxiety, but I think it's also just important for us to hold in mind that, you know, a child or young person or teen experiencing anxiety doesn't always mean that it's solely anxiety. It's going to be unique to that young person, the reasons why they might have developed anxiety, the impact, the duration, the severity of it as well, so that we can acknowledge that it's perfectly natural and normal to have a level of anxiety, a level of worry. But some of our young people will be more natural worriers than others. But also, as I was saying, is that sometimes we also see other mental health struggles as well. So I came from a clinical background working in eating disorders, and some of those young people described actually feeling a sense or experiencing anxiety first at their younger years and then developing an eating disorder. We can also see with anxiety, it might also have an impact on mood as well. So we're going to be thinking about anxiety, but what I would just invite you to also hold in mind and remember is that, you know, our roles within education are not to be diagnosing, but it's about acknowledging the complexities. And, you know, we're in a world at the moment where there's so much uncertainty as well. So I will invite you just to stop and pause and think about kind of some of the terminology and warning signs. And then at the end, we've got that opportunity, or you have that opportunity to ask any questions as well. So we'll try and get as much covered in the session today. So a warm welcome as well. Can I just also draw us all kind of to that awareness around that safety agreement, because I don't know about for anybody else, but we wear lots of different hats, don't we? So in the sense of our professional role, but also that we have a life outside of work as well. And sometimes people have joined webinars or training with myself and Jess, where actually they've wanted to kind of think about things because maybe what might be going on for their own children or young people in their lives as well. And we might also be joining today with our own journeys and experiences around anxiety as well. So just to recognise, we'll connect to the content both professionally and personally, so just being mindful of your own well-being, engaging with care. Obviously, what we're going to be discussing today, and it is also being recorded, but there are occasions where maybe I might share kind of experience, whether it be professionally or personally, so we keep that in this learning space as well. And then I think the other thing is just kind of listening with that empathy, and what I mean by that is that we will all carry our own kind of frame of reference, our thoughts, our kind of experiences. You know, the world has developed and changed since maybe I was at secondary school, so just acknowledging those things as well, so that we have that shared learning together in a way, hopefully, to support both our students, our pupils, our learners, but our own well-being as well, because ultimately we've got to be at the best we can. And I think anxiety is a really kind of interesting kind of area to think about, because I don't know for anybody else, but sometimes when I've been supporting a young person who is experiencing heightened levels of anxiety, I can almost feel it myself, and we can actually move out of our kind of regulated calm zone as well, so if we're at our best as well. So like I say, I will get us to kind of just stop and pause. I'll rest my voice and you can have a think. You can make a note if you want, or you can just kind of process that whilst I'm guiding us through the session as well. So in this webinar, what shall we, or what will I be kind of going through? So one of the things is recognising how anxiety presents in adolescence, and kind of will be drawing on what we have learned and what we know, and sharing that around the teen brain, and almost the kind of phrase around being kind of wired for danger as well. And our teens may be experiencing more fluctuations and heightened anxiety maybe than primary school age children and adults as well, because of some of the hormonal changes and maybe other things around sense of self and identity and expectations. We'll think about some of the common classroom triggers that potentially can heighten anxiety. Not an exhaustive list, and again, you might have other examples that you're thinking about as well. Try to bring that together today. Then applying those practical strategies. I don't know for anybody else, but when I attend webinars or training myself as a learner, I always like to be able to kind of at least take one thing away that I can find helpful as well. And then for us to think about how we respond effectively to anxious behaviour or anxiety in the classroom or in the community setting of the school or externally as well. So those will be the learning outcomes. So as I was alluding to, I think this recognition that adolescence is a really unique time, and for us to hold in mind that our students, our young people, our learners are developing rapidly in both emotion and thinking. And our role is to provide that consistency and that safety. And I think that's fundamental for our students, our pupils that are experiencing anxiety. And you might be on the webinar today where you might have pupils that actually are not able to get into school because of their anxiety. So again, we'll be thinking about it on that continuum as well. But we do know there are so many changes that are going on for our young people that can make it either more difficult or almost kind of increase the susceptibility or vulnerability when it comes to anxiety as well. And I often think it can be quite helpful just to stop and pause and just think about, you know, how we connect and how we relate in the context of anxiety, because sometimes for adults, maybe it might not make sense of why a pupil, a young person, is exhibiting anxiety. Sometimes it's hard to make sense of that, and incredibly difficult for our young people as well. So this connection activity is just for you to allow yourself to stop and pause and think about a time where you maybe have felt anxious, whether that be in professional setting or learning situation. It could have been an observation, an interview, it could have been during an exam, being asked a question that you weren't quite ready for. I always feel a little bit anxious before delivering a webinar, and then as I get going, things feel okay for me. But it's holding in mind, thinking about what happened to your thinking. So I don't know about anybody else, when we're anxious, and we can be anxious beings, what happened to our thinking? It might be, oh gosh, everything's going to go wrong, catastrophizing things. What happens if I say the wrong thing? Don't know about anybody else, but how our body responds as well. And I can definitely feel, you know, those physical sensations. So if we're thinking about for our pupils and learners, what might they be thinking? How might their body be responding? So very much getting into that, almost that fight, flight, freeze or fawn response, recognizing, you know, that adrenaline and cortisol going around the body. And then did it affect our confidence or performance? And I think here, the reason kind of thinking about this is that actually to hold in mind as well, for some of our pupils, that actually they might feel what I was describing, both in their thinking and their body, but actually it drives and motivates them. They're able to face those fears or tolerate those difficult feelings and emotions. But then for some of our pupils, actually the impact and the duration means that actually even physically walking into the school environment could feel so overwhelming. And some of that might also be about that cognitive overload as well, which is something that we will think about today. So I always think it's just helpful for us to think about, what does anxiety look like and feel like? Yes, acknowledging that it's perfectly natural and normal, and you know, it's important to talk about that and have that emotional understanding, but also to recognize that it is individual. Each of us on the call today will probably recognize what sort of things go on for us. Are we able to overcome them, or actually does it start to be a barrier? And that very much is almost like that internal dialogue that might also be going on for our pupils as well. So what do we know? This is the same physiological response our students experience often daily. But I think for us as adults to recognise and hold in mind is that we have that kind of those years. It might have been that, you know, we've faced those fears, we've tolerated some of those difficult feelings and emotions. But with anxiety, and particularly thinking about our young people, that anxiety cycle, the fear of the fear, and we do tend to see, not always, but do tend to see, avoidance can be one of those things that is used as a coping mechanism. So our teens, they're also faced with that kind of adversity or challenge around maybe not having the same coping strategies. And also for us to think about during those teen years, you know, really important, isn't it? They will often describe that, you know, the importance of peer-to-peer relationships and kind of that sense of belonging, that sense of identity. So potentially also trying to navigate that much stronger fear of peer judgment. Whereas as adults, when we've gone through some of those things, and I think again, though, we're individual, because somebody might hear something or have an experience and it's almost like water off a duck's back, but for somebody else it might actually have quite a profound impact as well. So it's just for us to hold in mind the uniqueness and the challenges faced during those teen years as well. And please, if there's anything that you're wanting to ask or it's making you reflect on, please make sure that you use the question and answers as well. So why does it matter? I think we're all joining today and we all can recognise, can't we, in the sense of we've observed that anxiety in secondary schools rising due to maybe potentially academic pressure and assessment stakes. So for some of our teenagers during high school years, maybe the expectations that they're placing on themselves might be around those perfectionist traits as well, that fear of failure as well. It could be that social comparison and fear of embarrassment, so much change going on during the teen years. We can also see that it could be to do with transitions, but those transitions can be between lessons. It could be to do with, change with teachers and expectations. I was working with a young person in year 8 who was having some time away from school because of their struggles with anxiety and emotionally based school avoidance. And what they were describing was that they'd established a really trusting relationship with their English teacher, but they were already getting quite worried and overwhelmed that what happens if, when I move to my next year, that I can't access the support of that teacher. So we can play a powerful role in creating that safety and belonging. But for some of our young people, they're already on edge and anticipating any change and fear of that as well. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes kind of drawing out the key elements when it comes to the brain development and emotional sensitivity, and also to recognise that anxiety is not just that well-being issue. So I mentioned about school-based avoidance, but it absolutely does, doesn't it, directly impact behaviour and engagement. And then if we also think about maybe our young people that have faced adversity, adverse childhood experiences, trauma, attachment, also to recognise as well that some of our pupils might be very much in survival brain rather than thinking brain. So it can affect every aspect and also can have a toll on physical health. And equally, a young person's physical health can also impact on maybe anxiety. So it's just important for us to kind of touch base, stop, pause, and recognise as well that some young people maybe potentially could have, for example, an undiagnosed physical health condition, but the symptoms are kind of mirroring what we might notice and observe in anxiety. So I always say, we need to kind of almost do a bit of, exploring and kind of considering all of those elements to ensure. So we will today think about maybe some of those strategies that we can draw on to hopefully mitigate against some of those, but also recognising as well for some of our children, they will need that external support or more intense support as well. So let me just spend a few moments kind of going through the teen brain. So recognising that the emotional brain develops faster than the reasoning brain, and connection guides regulation. And I don't know if anybody has come across, but a really useful TED Talk video that is available on YouTube, and I've signposted parent and carers to as well. So there's a really useful video if you've not watched it, and we'll make sure that we get that link over to you. But it's by somebody called Sarah Jane Blakemore, and it's called The Mysterious Workings of the Adolescent Brain. And literally it's about 15 minutes long, but it's really helpful just to give a bit of an overview and increase that understanding. And I've also had, really positive feedback from parent and carers. So let's think a little bit more about the teen brain. So what we do know is in adolescence, so we're thinking about within our secondary school settings, that the two main areas of the brain, those to do with emotions and thinking, are most affected. And the teen years are a time of significant change. So we're thinking about those hormonal changes in the body. What we're also seeing and noticing is, for example, the hormone melatonin affects teen sleep patterns. And that's where it can be somewhat double-edged as well for our young people who are struggling with anxiety or struggling with their mental health and emotional well-being, because sleep is so important. I mean, the recommended kind of sleep is that, around a third of our lives should be spent spent asleep, and it's helpful for repair and processing and those sort of things. And during the teen years, it can be far harder to actually get to sleep at those ideal times. So we also see, I don't know for anybody else, but if I've not had the greatest of sleep, I actually find it far more difficult to regulate my emotions and can feel overwhelmed. So if we've already got a young person who is experiencing anxiety and then struggling with their sleep, how difficult it can be as well. So we can also think about, almost kind of that whole approach about, thinking about, kind of the physical health, the sleep. What we also know is those new skills are developing all the time, and there are those links between risk taking and brain development. I mean, there's been talk, hasn't there, about newly qualified young drivers maybe taking more risks when they're with their peers than maybe with others. So there is quite a lot of research, fortunately, ever evolving and developing, but for us to be able to take into account and acknowledge that these potentially are some of those things that our young people are experiencing as well. And I think the other thing is, I use that phrase, wired for danger. I think it's also that recognition about that hypervigilance, because studies conducted in this area have found that actually there is, like I was saying, that greater likelihood for teens to become anxious, more so than children or adults. So within the school day, school timetable, some of our pupils, they might have marked variations in how they feel within themselves, times where maybe they're feeling safe, they're able to regulate their emotions, and other times where maybe they're experiencing those kind of peaks around anxiety as well. And why is it? Well, we know the amygdala, which is one of the areas associated with processing emotions, including fear, is one of the first areas to develop. So that might be where we see that fear response more likely to be elicited. And I think one of the other things, I don't know for those of you listening as well, is just that holding in mind as well that, when I asked you to think about at the very beginning, that connection activity around kind of, what anxiety looks like or feels like for ourselves individually. I think it's also about acknowledging and recognizing that we are still looking at things through our own lens. So I don't mind sharing, I'm looking at it through the lens of me at 54. Yes, I was a teen many, many, many years ago, but actually I'm still looking at it. My frame of reference is based on where things are for me now. So one of the other things for us to kind of think about is that actually an event that might be mildly distressing for an adult could be an extremely distressing experience for a teenager, even to the point of emotional trauma and turmoil. And I often give the example, and maybe you can think of others, give an example of maybe a young person who's been in their first relationship, the intensity of the feelings and emotions, and then after a couple of weeks that relationship breaks down. For some pupils, they'll be able to take it in their stride, but for another pupil, it could be incredibly overwhelming and distressing, because to them, that 2-3 weeks has felt like an eternity. So it's always about us allowing, considering and thinking about, for those young people, what those experiences are, what sense and how they feel and what they make, so that actually we don't go in, not meaningfully. I'm not saying that we do. I've made mistakes myself before, where maybe jumping in and kind of almost minimizing something because I'm applying my own kind of experiences. So recognizing that they're more wired for danger, and that can fit then when we're thinking about anxiety as well. So let's just think for a moment or two, because I've been using the term anxiety, but thinking about what anxiety looks like in our secondary students. So just for a moment, just think about, you might be thinking of particular pupils or young people in your life. Have you noticed, have you observed, what have you observed? Has it been to do with, kind of behaviour? Is it been through having an interaction and a connection where that young person has shared something about maybe how they're feeling as well? So let's just think, what are some of the signs we would observe or notice? And then I'll share some of them with you. Not an exhaustive list, but some of the things that we can think about. So let me just share some of those with you. So some of the warning signs to think about is, so it could be around those academic behaviours. So, you know, this might resonate for some of you, that avoidance of work or refusal to start. I was supporting a young person who had just done their mock exams, GCSEs, and then heading to doing their finals, and they hadn't shared with anybody that they'd spent a lot of time revising for their mock exams. And they were aware that some of their kind of peers, friends had kind of joked or had some banter around, I've not really done anything, you know, they're only the mock exams. But unfortunately for them, they'd put a lot of work into their revision. And when they got their results, they were incredibly disappointed because they'd set the bar at a certain level for them. And what they were describing was they were literally berating themselves. They weren't sharing with anybody else. They didn't want to share with family. And what they'd said was, Gemma, you know, I spent a lot of time trying my best. My friends didn't really try, you know, but what it's made me think is, why am I even bothering? Because I'm not going to get the results that I want to get. But, you know, creating those spaces, isn't it, for our pupils to take the risk to maybe share things that they're carrying internally, that they're worried about expressing, so that we can work with boosting their self-esteem and self-worth, within also being realistic maybe about grades and obtaining what grades might be realistic for them. And it's really hard sometimes, isn't it, to kind of navigate that as well. The other thing is, like I was mentioning about that perfectionism, so don't get me wrong, I'm sure we can all appreciate a level of, you know, setting high standards or driving or pushing ourselves and kind of moving ourselves out of our comfort zone absolutely can be really helpful. But I've also worked with pupils who academically are obtaining the best and the highest grades, but at a cost to their mental health and emotional well-being. So it's for us to kind of think about, you know, we might be praising, you know, rightly so, you know, really good, you know, work that's being done. But some of our young people who maybe have that low self-esteem and self-worth, and maybe some of those unwanted thoughts around anxiety, and I'll share some of those with you, might actually then interpret, well, actually, at all costs, I need to get the results and the grades that I need to be doing. And it's interesting, digressing slightly, but if we think about the journey our young people go on, I was delivering training in an FE setting on Monday, and one of the support staff had said that it was really difficult. They'd taken a phone call at the lunchtime from a parent whose child has just found out that they haven't had an offer at any university to do dentistry despite having their highest grades. And for that young person, it's always been that they've been able to achieve. So almost about how do we support and navigate for those ups and downs as well. I don't know about anybody else, but, you know, I've definitely worked with some young people where they literally go into that shutdown. I don't get it. That's it. There's no point even bothering, and almost go into that kind of fight or flight response or freeze response as well. And also, you know, to hold in mind that fear of answering questions publicly. So for some of our young people, they just can't tolerate that. Others might be able to, but I worked with a young person who really struggled attending at high school. And it wasn't about, you know, what others were expecting of them. It was what they were expecting of themselves, and really the anxiety, the fear of the fear, and very much the kind of discomfort and overwhelming kind of anxious thoughts about the fear of what happens if I ask something and I freeze, or I can't answer, or I say the wrong thing. So there can be those external, but also those internal stresses as well when it comes to anxiety. So again, not an exhaustive list, but some of the things for us to think about and maybe to tease out as well. So what might we see? So those behavioural responses as well. So it could be that disruption or defiance defiance. It could be walking out or refusing to engage. Could be frequent requests to leave the room, and aggression masking vulnerability. So I think that's one of the other things that can be quite important for us to kind of think about. For some young people, they do go into fight mode. So maybe they've had experiences where maybe they've been excluded, or, you know, those sort of things that then unfortunately just create and maybe exacerbate, you know, that feeling of not feeling safe, not feeling a sense of belonging and connection and safety, which we know is really important as well, isn't it? And then those emotional and physical signs, so, you know, they could be really, really horrible. And I think, you know, hopefully, you know, our children and young people are being supported to be able to kind of make sense and be able to articulate, you know, some of those kind of experiences. But for some young people, just as adults, I don't know about anybody else, but sometimes I probably find it easier to say I've got a headache than maybe describe, you know, those symptoms or feelings of, say, overwhelm and anxious thinking styles as well. So it might be that irritability, it might be that low confidence. So that's that recognition that often our young people, when they are struggling with anxiety, may also be experiencing that low self-esteem and self-worth. So 5 good things happen today and 1 negative. They're more likely to hold on to the negative because it supports that belief, that core belief. Could be fatigue or headaches, and obviously that poor concentration, because it can literally be like an internal dialogue, and thus very difficult to be able to stay focused and to concentrate as well. So we might see in the classroom and in the school environment some of those warning signs as well, which maybe then we can start to think about that curiosity and recognizing as well what we see above the surface. So what we're seeing, you know, in those behaviors, what actually might be going on below the surface for that young person as well. So we delve a little bit deeper. I was describing the other day, you know, imagining, you know, that rucksack that a young person is carrying into school, what might be in that rucksack. There could be a number of things that, you know, they are carrying whilst coming into school as well. And then what are some of the common anxiety triggers? So like I say, not an exhaustive list, but thinking about, you know, exams and tests, and we've spoken about that fear of failure. It could be homework overload or deadlines, maybe comparing themselves to others or putting themselves under pressure to do well. Could be those friendship problems, because during the teen years, you know, that acceptance, making sense of who one is, identity, lots of changes that are going on as well. Isn't it, I think, natural to want to be liked or to fit in? And if you don't feel that sense of belonging, that can create a level of anxiety and worry. Transitions, and those can be any. So transitions in the day, transitions from lessons. It could be transitions coming up. So you might notice that some of your final year 11s year 11s that obviously are trying to navigate exam period, but also coming to an end of being at school, maybe if you haven't got a 6th form attached, or moving on to 6th form. And then obviously we might have those things around family conflict. And I think something that I haven't mentioned here, but I don't know for others, is actually a recognition of what's going on societally at this moment in time. So if we think about war and conflict, if we think about the unknowns and the uncertainties, it's also holding in mind that some of our young people are carrying lots of worry, lots of anxiety. They might be worried about their own family members as well. So we have to touch base with, in 2026, what is currently going on. And so that wider context, but also kind of community based as well. So for some of our young people, you know, do they feel safe within their community? Is there unrest? So we'll notice and see the landscape is ever varied and changing depending on that as well. And then I spoke about those unwanted thoughts, you know, thinking about those anxious thoughts. And I think just important to highlight that when a student is anxious, their brain often presents thoughts as facts. So, for example, I'm going to fail. everyone will think I'm stupid. I can't cope with this. And actually, if we help to support, to challenge some of those, so are those things being driven by feelings rather than fact? So is this thought definitely true? Or is it my anxiety talking? So really important as well, because, you know, I think one of the most important things when we think about anxiety is nobody is choosing to experience anxiety. You know, there is, yes, a natural level of anxiety, but when it moves along that continuum, some of our young people will be meeting the threshold or have a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder. So it's really important to acknowledge and to be able to have those open conversations with those young people, to be a supporter, an advocate, and to be able to ground and support around the impact anxiety might be having for them as well. So, not an exhaustive list, but I wanted to bring to today's webinar just because these may be some of the things that we might be noticing or observing. Or equally, we might have our young people in school that are doing absolutely everything they can to present that everything is okay and to mask it. So that's one of the other things that I would invite us all, and I have to remind myself as well to do, is we can think about what those warning signs are. We can have that awareness about anxiety. But what's really important to hold in mind is some of our pupils who are experiencing anxiety and it's having an impact, maybe are doing everything they can to present to others that everything's okay. So they might not necessarily be on our immediate radar. So what can we do? We can have that awareness of maybe what might be going on for some of our young people experiencing anxiety. And adults experiencing anxiety will also notice that as well. So it could be predictive thinking, so predicting a certain outcome without evidence. So I've had young people say, Gemma, I know that I've got a really bad grade for a piece of work that I've handed in. And I'll ask them how. Oh, well, my teacher, you know, the way that they looked at me today, so they've interpreted something, they've predicted something. It could be overgeneralizing, emotional reasoning. It could be that black and white thinking. So things are either good or bad. There's no in-betweens. That negative labeling, so labeling oneself with minimal evidence. So I'm so stupid, I'm useless, I'm never going to pass, I'm never going to get to where I want to be, and thus catastrophizing. So seeing that situation as the worst possible scenario, even if it isn't. So those are some of the anxious thinking styles, and that's where, you know, sometimes using, for example, something like a thought record sheet to challenge those thoughts, so that actually what is the evidence to support those beliefs, and supporting our young people to do that. So I'm already lending or leading ourselves into thinking about some of those practical strategies. So I just invite you just to take a couple of moments to think about, you know, within your settings, or, you know, externally, if you've supported young people that are experiencing anxiety, or what we've gone through today is already making you curious about maybe kind of some of those pupils or students or learners that you've not thought about. Kind of any particular strategies that have worked. So I'll just take a moment to stop and pause, and just if you want to think about, I'll just invite you to think about any of those strategies. And I do know we've got the question and answers, so obviously if anybody wants to ask anything, but please also, if you want to gift the rest of the kind of group on the call any strategies that you've noticed, because we can definitely also pick those up as well. And then we'll go through some of the strategies. So I've spoken about, the importance of belonging and connection. And I think, the first starting point, and please, many schools and settings, have really kind of, create those safe spaces, within our school settings as well. But just holding in mind that, the importance of creating that psychological safety in the first place. So thinking about, how do we greet our pupils, by name, setting that calm, predictable tone, thinking about normalizing mistakes and learning struggles. So, we can gift our mistakes as well. We can kind of share some of what goes on. So yeah, I can see that you're frustrated. I felt frustrated, or I've experienced a level of anxiety, and this is how I overcome. So it's not about a full disclosure. It's just about us being able to gift and normalize and have that conversation together as well. And I think one of the other things is that sometimes it is important to think about those individual anxiety plans for our pupils and students. So, thinking about avoiding putting anxious pupils on the spot, because that can be absolutely crippling for them. So it might be thinking about approaches where we're grading things and we're thinking about together, because I think that's one of the other important things is sometimes I think we just want to make things okay, don't we? We see a pupil or student struggling, but I myself sometimes have fallen into kind of that fix it mode, where actually it's really important to hear from that pupil, that student, what they might find helpful as well, and we work together collaboratively as well. One of the other things that we can think about, and it might be things that you're doing, is just thinking about reducing that cognitive load. So it's holding in mind that anxious pupils aren't just doing the task in front of them. So at the same time, they're managing a whole set of internal pressures. So those might be, for example, what if I get it wrong? What are other people writing? Am I going to be asked something out loud? So their working memory is already overloaded before they even start to think about the learning. So reducing cognitive load isn't about stripping away those learning opportunities, but it's about actually what can we do to ladder it, to scale it for that young person. So it might be thinking about, ourselves stopping and pausing, thinking about, giving those instructions one step at a time, so pupils don't have to hold everything in their head. We're really explicit about what good enough looks like, so they're not guessing or aiming for perfection. So I think we can gift, that knowledge and awareness around perfectionism as well. And that we build in thinking time, so they're not put on the spot before they're ready. And I think one of the key kind of points here is that we're not lowering expectations. The thinking is still there. The challenge is still there, but what we're doing is creating the environment so that our pupils can actually access their thinking. So I mentioned before about, maybe some of our pupils that are already or constantly in survival rather than thinking brain. So something really important, because if we can work at reducing some of that overload, anxious pupils hopefully will be far more able to engage, respond and succeed. So just something for us to think about when it comes to the cognitive load. Something else that we might be thinking about is offering choice and control. So, for example, I'll just give one example here. We might think of others. So we're starting an extended writing task, and instead of directing everyone in the same way, we could maybe think about, you've got a couple of choices to help you get started. So that could be you can sit where you are, or if you focus better somewhere quieter, then you can move to the side table. So really important about that flexibility as well. It might be that actually to begin, you can either start with the introduction, or you can bullet point your ideas first, whichever feels easier. And then it's also recognising that for some of our pupils, you know, it might be that they want to, or they feel that they can manage things better working in on their own to start with, and then maybe starting to work with a partner as well. And again, you know, just thinking about the flexibility there, because it can make a huge difference. I was working with a young person that had really struggled to be at school, that missed quite a lot of time, and then actually meeting with school, meeting with parent and carers, they looked at the things that were creating the greatest level of anxiety, almost doing a kind of graded exposure. So what was creating, because ultimately the importance of being able to get into school, to be able to have those interactions, that learning, that purpose and structure. So actually doing a graded return and thinking about a kind of anxiety plan that would be able to think about choice and control, and also to empower as well. So those may be some of the things that we can think about there. What I'd also say, just mindful, I'll pay attention to the time as well, is, you know, noticing and responding early. So, you know, looking for those subtle signs, whether that be withdrawal, avoidance, perfectionism, maybe checking in quietly rather than publicly. So how can we kind of use our curiosity? You know, I've noticed you seem unsettled. How can I help? And having worked with young people that then have moved on and gone to university, because I worked within a university setting for a number of years, you know, those students were able to remember the time, the place and the person, and they would be able to remember the teacher or the support staff, somebody who had truly cared out loud, you know, been curious and offered that support, and the, you know, the positive impact of that. So don't underestimate, you know, those kind of moments. Sometimes it's a smile, it's a nod, it's not necessarily what we say, but it's how we deliver or how we present to our young people as well, so that they know that they matter and that we are there to support them as well. So there's the noticing and respond, and then I'll just move us along to some of the other suggestions as well. So the other thing is about recognising the importance of supporting regulation. So what we also know is that for anxious pupils, it's not just about understanding the work, it's about managing what's happening in their body. So when I was mentioning the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, so holding in mind, you know, that they might have a racing heart, shallow breathing, or feeling overwhelmed. You might have had the experience of supporting pupils. Students have experienced a panic attack. So thinking about building in short reset moments. So these don't need to be big or disruptive. So I think it's also about acknowledging that sometimes even something as simple as a brief pause, stretching, or a quick stand and reset can help pupils settle, because it can be really difficult to tolerate those physiological and physical symptoms of anxiety. So it could be encouraging that slow breathing, but in a way that doesn't single anyone out. So it might be guiding the whole class through a calm pause, which gives anxious pupils what they need without drawing attention. And actually thinking about allowing the use of grounding tools, so it could be a stress ball or even just doodling in a notebook, can help pupils stay present and focused. Don't know about anybody else, but if I'm kind of feeling kind of dysregulated, then actually sometimes I can be actively listening, but I might be doodling or doing something else as well. So it's about just reminding ourselves, you know, of calming the body and the mind as well. And these strategies don't interrupt learning. They actually hopefully make it more possible, because pupils are better able to regulate and re-engage as well. And some of you might use things like emotional coaching as an example as well. So just some of the things to think about, you know, that stop, pause, reset, thinking of maybe using a grounding exercise based on the senses, lots of different strategies. And I think also empowering our young people as well. So I don't know if anybody has come across or signposted young people to. But the Anna Freud Centre have a wonderful resource section for young people. So it's called Self-Help, Self-Care for Young People. And there are lots and lots of tips and strategies, apps and guidance. And it's lovely because it's been put together by young people as well. So that might be something that you want to take a look at to get some ideas, or actually to encourage the young people to take a look at as well. And then just as we move to the close, to ensure that there's time for questions and answers, as well as just kind of thinking about adjusting expectations when needed. So thinking about those flexible deadlines. It might be actually a pass to leave a lesson early, you know, thinking about the things that we can do to make those reasonable adjustments, and for us to remember to separate behaviour from emotional distress. So as we always say, you know, behaviour is a form of communication, and thinking about, you know, those unmet needs our young people might be experiencing as well. And then I think finally, before we come to a close, just holding in mind potentially some of those next steps afterwards, you know, thinking about what happens after you've noticed a concern in the classroom, because that follow-up step is just as important as the initial response. So thinking about agreeing those next steps with pupils. So thinking about, for example, what would make your next lesson feel a little bit easier for you. And really it's about here, you know, giving a sense of voice and control to the pupil, even in small ways. So we're not solving everything on the spot, but we're showing that we're truly actively and attentively listening to understand, not to answer, and that support may need to be ongoing. And then to remember that you don't have to individually carry it alone. Sometimes we only have a little bit of the jigsaw and needing to put it together and ensuring the support. So that could be, you know, pastoral support as well. So it might be kind of, you know, that teamwork, that team around us and the young person as well, so that we can build that fuller picture as a team. And then that also is just, you know, that reminder as well, as teachers, you know, it's natural to want to help, but we're not expected to carry everything ourselves. So I would just ask and invite you just to hold in mind before we move to a close, instead of maybe at times thinking, which I've done, I need to fix this, we shift to who is best placed to support this pupil further. So something that we can think about there. And then I would just say, and then we'll get to passing over to Becky just to do one final thing, is hold in mind as well, calm, predictable adults help anxious pupils feel safe enough to learn as well. So, you know, if we are grounded, you know, we're role models, aren't we? You know, hold in mind that anxiety often doesn't sit in isolation, but those connections, creating that sense of safety and belonging, is incredibly important as well. So I just want to say thank you very much for listening to me at the end of what will have been a busy day for you all. I want to say thank you. If you want to visit us at Cog-Spark, please make sure that you do connect on LinkedIn as well. I'm just going to pass over to Becky because I believe she's got one thing that she wants to kind of bring to this space today. And then absolutely, if anyone's got any questions, please we'll go to the question and answers. Thanks. Over to you, Becky.
Thank you so much, Gemma, and I will be very quick because we want to leave time for your questions. And thanks for all the emoji loves. We love to see the emojis, so appreciate it. I run a termly session for educators focused on wellbeing. So maybe that's something you do in your daily role. Maybe you oversee it, or maybe you're just passionate about it. It's a free online session network opportunity to bring people together. And I bring in experts, you know, people like Gemma, to come and talk about particular topics. On the 3rd of June, we are focusing on staff wellbeing. So I've got some brilliant authors, Tracy Lees and Charlotte Rowley, who are going to come and talk about staff wellbeing, and it's a really lovely opportunity to connect with other people doing that work. So if you're interested, please do drop us an email there.